Some nights change a life forever, and they don't announce themselves when they arrive. Sometimes it's just the sound of rain on a windshield, a voice calling out in the dark, or a choice made in a split second, the kind you don't realize will follow you for years. Tonight's story begins with a man trying to outrun his past and a woman holding on by a thread. Two strangers who cross paths in a way neither of them could have predicted, and nothing that comes after will feel the same. If you're ready for a journey about courage, compassion, and the moments that shape us when we least expect it, then settle in. This one stays with you. The rain hit the windshield like 1,000 frantic fingers, each one louder than the last. The wipers struggled to keep up, scraping back and forth with a tired rhythm that matched the man behind the wheel. Micah Turner leaned forward, eyes narrowed, breath steady but worn, like someone who'd spent too many nights trying to outrun memories that refused to stay dead. He could hear everything tonight. The low hum of the engine, the hiss of wet tires cutting through puddles, and beneath it all, a soft wheeze in his own chest that always surfaced when exhaustion finally caught him. Rainy nights used to be his battlefield. Nights when sirens wailed, radios crackled, and he'd been the kind of man who ran toward the screaming. Back when he still believed he could save everyone. But that was before the accident. Before the hospital corridor flooded with voices telling him if she'd arrived 10 minutes earlier. Before he walked out of the firehouse for the last time, unable to bear the sound of another emergency call. Tonight, he was just a single dad finishing a brutal shift, desperate to get home to his little girl. Ellie hated storms. On nights like this, she'd curl up in her blanket and whisper, "Daddy, make it stop," as if he held some secret power over the sky. Micah glanced at the clock on the dashboard. Past 11. Too late, too wet, too heavy. He rubbed a hand across his jaw, trying to ignore the ache behind his eyes. Then a sound pierced through the rain. A scream. Not sharp, not loud, but trembling. Desperate. It cut through the night like a flare. Micah's hands tightened on the steering wheel. No. Not again, he muttered to himself. He pressed the gas, then instinct won. His foot slammed the brake. The truck skidded before coming to a stop. Another scream. Closer this time. His heartbeat thudded through his ribs. His mind rebelled. Keep driving. Go home. Ellie needs you. But another part of him, the part molded by years in uniform, the part that refused to die, growled back. Someone else needs you too. Micah cursed under his breath and swung the truck around. He spotted her in the flickering streetlight, a woman stumbling along the sidewalk, clutching her shoulder. Rain soaked her hair and clothes. Her steps were uneven, her breath ragged and sharp enough to hear even through the storm. Micah pulled over and jumped out. "Ma'am, are you hurt?" he called. She flinched at the sound of his voice, then swayed. He heard the sickening thud of her knees hitting the pavement. He sprinted forward. Up close, she was shaking violently. Her left shoulder was slick with blood, warm enough that the rain hadn't washed it all away yet. Her voice trembled like broken glass. He took my bag. I couldn't. Run." Her words dissolved into sobs. Micah knelt beside her, his hands gentle but steady. Hey, you're all right. I've got you." His inner voice whispered, "You can't do this again. You promised Ellie." But his arms were already moving, already lifting the injured woman, as if his body remembered how to save people even when his heart couldn't. She winced as the cold air hit her wound. "Please, don't leave me," she whispered. "I'm not going anywhere," Micah said, surprising himself with the certainty in his tone. He bundled her into the passenger seat, fastened the belt carefully so it wouldn't press against her injury, and started the engine. She clutched the door handle with trembling fingers, her breathing shallow, almost panicked. "You're safe," he repeated more quietly this time. "I'm taking you to the hospital." As he drove, he heard her breath stutter, heard her swallow hard between flashes of fear, and beneath those sounds, the soft echo of his own past, the night he drove just as fast, praying for a miracle that came too late. When they reached the hospital, the automatic doors slid open with a hiss. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead while nurses rushed by, shoes squeaking on the polished floor. The air smelled of antiseptic and cold metal scents Micah had tried for years to forget. He stayed with her, sat beside her on the narrow bed, held her hand when memories overwhelmed her and her breath broke into jagged gasps. 4 long hours passed, marked only by the beeping of monitors, the distant codes called over the PA system, and the quiet tremor in her voice every time she woke from a nightmare. She never asked him to stay, but every time she opened her eyes she looked for him, and he was there. At dawn, a doctor finally approached. "She'll be okay," he said. "No internal damage, just shock adrenaline crash and stitches for the shoulder." Relief washed through Micah until his phone buzzed violently. Ellie's babysitter. Panic in her voice. Ellie burning with fever, crying for him. Micah looked at the sleeping woman on the hospital bed. Her face, even in rest, still held the faint imprint of fear. He wanted unexpectedly to stay until she woke, but he couldn't. His daughter came first. He stood, leaned close, and whispered, "You're safe now." Then he left, carrying the sound of the rain-soaked night with him. The next morning, Micah walked back into the hospital holding 2 cups of coffee, one for himself, one for her. A small, foolish gesture he didn't quite understand yet. He reached the room. The bed was empty. Sheets neatly folded. No trace she had ever been there. No note, no name, nothing. Just the echo of last night's storm still humming in his ears. Micah stared at the empty bed, a chill crawling down his spine. Who was she? And why did she vanish? Micah stood frozen at the foot of the empty hospital bed, the 2 cups of coffee cooling rapidly in his hands. One was meant for her, whoever she really was. The woman who'd clung to him through 4 trembling hours. The woman whose fear had echoed all the way into his own old wounds. Now she was gone. He blinked slowly, trying to piece together what could have happened between dawn and now. Discharged, transferred. Did she wake up scared and slip out alone? The questions piled up, each one heavier than the last. A nurse hustled past, pushing a cart that rattled against the tiles. "Excuse me," Micah called. "The woman who was in this room. Do you know where she went?" The nurse glanced at her chart, then at him. "Oh, she checked out early this morning." "So, she's all right?" he asked, feeling a strange knot loosen in his chest. "She's stable," the nurse said, then paused, lowering her voice. "She asked about you." Micah's eyebrows drew together. "She... what?" "She was anxious when she woke. Asked if the man who sat with her was still here. When I told her you left because your daughter had a fever, she just nodded like she understood more than we did." Micah swallowed, surprised by how much that tiny detail hit him. "She wanted me to thank you," the nurse added. "Said if you came back to tell you." She was grateful. Grateful. A simple word, but it sat strangely deep. He'd spent the last few years feeling like he'd failed the only person who truly mattered, his late wife. Hearing gratitude from someone he'd helped startled something awake inside him. Still, he didn't know her name, her story, her world, and maybe that was for the best. Micah stepped out into the parking lot, the morning air damp with fading drizzle. The sun broke through in pale beams, warming the pavement but not quite reaching the cold heaviness in him. He tossed the untouched coffee into the trash, climbed into his truck, and told himself he'd done his part. A stranger in trouble, a stranger helped. Life moved on. It was just one night, he reminded himself as the engine started. People don't circle back into your life because of a storm. He had a daughter to care for, a job to find, a life to keep afloat. He drove away, leaving the hospital behind him. Across town, in a glass tower that pierced the skyline like a polished blade, Eleanor Hayes stood with her back to the sweeping view of the city. She'd changed out of the torn, rain-soaked blouse and into a perfectly pressed suit. Yet the phantom weight of last night still clung to her shoulders. Her office was quiet, except for the soft tapping of her pen and the faint hum of the building's ventilation system. But inside her chest, her heartbeat felt too loud, out of rhythm, unsettled. She stared at the stack of documents on her desk. Numbers, projections, proposals. Her world was measured in profit margins and timelines. She had built walls so tall that hardly anyone ever saw the woman behind the CEO. But last night someone had. Someone who'd held her trembling hands. Someone who'd stayed. She inhaled slowly, grounding herself. She was back in control here. She had to be. A sharp knock broke her thoughts. Her board liaison stepped in, tablet in hand. "The board is ready for your signature, Ms. Hayes. We need to finalize the closure of the Maple Ridge Clinic this quarter." Eleanor blinked. Maple Ridge? The clinic had been losing money for years. The board insisted on reallocating funds toward their new flagship medical center, a place polished and prestigious designed for corporate partnerships. She reached for the pen, but when she touched it, her fingers hesitated. All she could see was the blurry hallway from last night, the fluorescent lights, the panic in her own breath, and the steady warmth of a stranger's hand anchoring her. She signed the document. Her job required decisiveness, and she had perfected the art of locking doubt out of her bloodstream. Yet, as she handed the folder back, an ember of discomfort lingered. When her liaison stepped out, Eleanor sat in silence for a long moment. Then she reached for her phone. "Lena," she said to her assistant when the call connected. "I need you to find someone for me." There was a short pause. "Find who, ma'am?" "The man who brought me to the hospital last night." Another pause. "Do you know his name? Phone number?" "No." "Any identifying information?" Eleanor closed her eyes, trying to recall details. All she saw were tired, kind eyes and a warm presence that cut through her fear in a way she'd never experienced. "He was in a dark jacket," she said. "Mid-30s. Strong voice." She exhaled. "He stayed with me. That's all I know." Her assistant hesitated. "I'll try, ma'am, but that's not much to go on." "I know," Eleanor whispered. "Just try." But 3 months later, they were still no closer. Eleanor stood in her office again, staring at the last report her assistant had sent. Every trail ended in a dead end. No cameras outside the alley had caught his plates. No hospital record listed his name. He had slipped through her world like a ghost. A ghost she couldn't forget. She pressed a palm against her forehead, exhaling shakily. For someone who ran corporations and controlled empires of data, failing to find one man made her feel strangely small. Maybe he doesn't want to be found, she thought. But just as that idea tightened in her chest, her phone buzzed with a new message. A job posting forwarded by a neighbor. Security needed. Hayes Innovations. Full-time. Good benefits. Micah stared at the screen, Ellie leaning against his arm at the kitchen table, coloring quietly. A stable job, reliable hours, health insurance for Ellie, a way to breathe again. He'd been turned down at 3 places already this month for not having a degree, but security work, he could handle that. He looked at Ellie. "What do you think, Bug? Should Daddy try one more time?" Ellie nodded enthusiastically, her ponytail bouncing. "Try. Try. Try." Micah smiled and kissed the top of her head. He didn't know that the job he was applying for belonged to the very woman who vanished from that hospital room. And she didn't know the man she'd been searching for was about to walk straight into her world again. As Micah hit Submit Application, a quiet storm began to gather, one neither he nor Eleanor could see coming yet. The elevator doors slid shut with a soft hiss, sealing Micah inside a gleaming steel box that smelled faintly of cold air and lemon disinfectant. As the numbers climbed higher, he felt the pressure settle in his chest, a quiet thud, steady but heavy. This place was nothing like the small clinics or community centers he'd worked around before. Hayes Innovations was another world. He adjusted the collar of his only decent shirt and reminded himself why he was here. A full-time job, benefits, stability for Ellie. He whispered under his breath, "One step at a time, man." The elevator chimed and the doors opened into a corridor where footsteps echoed crisply. The ambient hum of expensive machinery filled the air. Every sound, distant typing heels, clicking vents, whirring, seemed sharper, colder. The kind of environment where men like him rarely felt they belonged. A receptionist directed him to a waiting room. The chair creaked softly beneath him. He placed the folder with his resume on his lap, smoothing the edges. He had rehearsed what to say, but his mind kept drifting back to Ellie's smile that morning. "Good luck, Daddy," she had whispered, hugging him so tight he felt her heartbeat. He took a slow breath. A door opened. A woman in HR stepped out. Micah Turner. He stood. "Yes, ma'am. Right this way." The interview room was a minimalist space glass table, chrome chairs, modern lighting that buzzed faintly overhead. Two people sat waiting, HR and a board representative with sharp posture and an even sharper expression. They greeted him, their voices flat and professional. Micah sat holding his breath steady. Then the door opened behind him. He didn't look up at first, just heard the quiet click of heels on polished floor-controlled, confident, the kind of walk that commanded a room without raising a voice. "Thank you for waiting," the new arrival said. Micah glanced up. His spine went rigid. It was her, Eleanor Hayes, but not the trembling woman from the rain-soaked night, not the one gripping his hand in the hospital hallway. This version of her was composed, guarded, wrapped in an immaculate white suit that gave off an almost electric authority. Her hair was pulled back, her expression unreadable. He barely recognized her until she looked at him. Something in her eyes flickered. A breath hitched so subtle that no one else noticed. But he heard it. He felt it. And she froze. Not outwardly, not enough for the room to gasp, but he saw it. Saw her world tilt. She took her seat across from him, fingers interlaced on the table. "Let's begin," she said, her voice steady in a way that felt practiced. Micah swallowed. She doesn't remember. Or maybe she isn't sure. HR started with generic questions, her voice a dull drone. "Tell us about your previous roles. What makes you qualified for a security position here?" Micah spoke plainly, voice low and sincere. "I've worked in high-stress environments, emergency response. My job was to keep people safe and make fast decisions." Eleanor's posture shifted barely, but enough for him to notice. She leaned a fraction forward. HR continued, "Why leave that field?" Micah paused, his hands clasped loosely, knuckles pale. He heard the faint hum of the lights above him, the quiet tapping of the board representative's pen. Each sound pushed against the memory he hated revisiting. "I had a family emergency," he said quietly. "A loss. I needed to be there for my daughter." Eleanor's throat worked in a small, involuntary swallow. Micah forced a breath inward. "But I still want to contribute, still want to protect people." The board representative scribbled something. "Your resume shows no formal degree." "And how old is the child?" 4-5, Micah corrected gently. "And yes, I'm a single father." A brief, heavy silence, the kind that carried judgment. Eleanor shifted her gaze to the board representative, just a flicker but sharp enough to cut the air. The room cooled a degree. HR asked a few more questions, but the atmosphere had morphed tense, uncertain. Then it happened. Eleanor lifted her hand to adjust her suit jacket. Her fingers brushed her shoulder exactly where she'd been injured that night. A small, unconscious motion. Micah's breath caught. He looked at her again, really looked. The faint line along her shoulder where stitches had healed. The soft tremor in her left hand. And at the same time her eyes dropped to his forearm, to the faint scar where she had dug her nails in while fighting panic in the hospital corridor. Her lips parted. A single whisper escaped, barely audible but impossible to miss. "It's you." HR blinked. Ma'am Eleanor didn't answer. Her gaze stayed locked on Micah, shock and recognition swirling into something deeper, heavier. Micah felt his breath shake. "You remember," he murmured. The board representative frowned, eyes darting between them. Is there something we should know? Eleanor inhaled, steadying herself, but emotion bled through her voice despite her restraint. Mr. Turner was the man who stayed with me the night I was attacked. HR stiffened. Oh, well, of course that's admirable, but nothing, Eleanor said softly, yet firmly. The tension in the room snapped. HR's face paled. The board representative stiffened. Personal involvement. Potential bias. The kind of thing corporate structures hated. HR cleared her throat. Ms. Hayes, there could be a conflict of interest if I said Eleanor interjected we're not finished here. Micah felt the shift in the air. This wasn't just recollection. This was collision two worlds that weren't supposed to touch now pressed together in a room too small to hold the weight. He waited, pulse steady but uneasy. Eleanor turned back to him calmer now, yet her voice carried something softer, something that had been missing from her life for far too long. I want to hear his full story, she said. HR exchanged a look with the board representative who was now glaring as though sensing trouble. Micah felt it too. Something was happening. Something none of them fully understood yet. As HR's pen snapped in her grip, the board representative leaned forward, eyes narrowing at Eleanor already calculating the political fallout. And Micah realized this interview wasn't just a job opportunity. It was the beginning of a quiet war. The door clicked shut behind Micah, leaving him alone in the hallway outside the interview room. He could still hear faint voices through the frosted glass, HR whispering urgently, the board representative's sharper tone slicing through the air. Their words weren't clear, but their message was. He wasn't wanted here. Not really. Not by them. He exhaled slowly, feeling every sound around him, the distant hum of printers, the mechanical groan of an elevator descending, the steady buzz of fluorescent lights overhead. Corporate soundscapes always made him tense. They reminded him of stripped-down silence, no warmth, no heart, just efficiency. He shifted his weight and rolled his shoulders. Maybe this was a mistake. Maybe he didn't belong in a building where people measured worth in degrees and resumes instead of grit and lived experience. Micah rubbed a palm over his jaw. I should just walk out, leave before they do it for me. Voices leaked more clearly now. Single father, unreliable childcare. He has no formal education, emotionally compromised. Micah's chest tightened. He'd been called many things since the accident, but hearing strangers dissect his life, judging from fragments, made the sting feel fresh. He took a step toward the elevator. Just one step. Then a small sound echoed down the hallway. Tiny footsteps. Light hurried completely out of place in a building made of glass and steel. Daddy Micah spun around. Ellie barreled toward him, hair slightly messy, backpack swinging. A neighbor followed behind her, panting. I'm so sorry the sitter called me. I work nearby, so I brought her straight here when she got upset. Ellie clung to his leg, breath shaky. Daddy, I thought you forgot me. The tremble in her voice pierced him deeper than any HR critique ever could. He dropped to one knee and wrapped her in his arms, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo peach and something warm. His anchor. His whole reason. It's okay, Bug. I'm right here, he murmured against her hair. Dad's not going anywhere. Footsteps approached from behind. HR and the board representative stood in the doorway, both staring as if someone had spilled paint on their polished floors. Their expressions tightened, calculating, disapproving. A child, the board rep muttered. Here. During an interview, HR's voice thinned. This illustrates our concerns. Micah felt his face heat with a mix of embarrassment and anger. He stood slowly, Ellie holding onto his hand. We're leaving, he whispered to her. This isn't worth it. But before he could turn, another pair of footsteps sounded. Softer, controlled, familiar. Eleanor stepped into the hallway. She froze for half a second, not at the sight of Ellie, but at the sight of Micah holding her as if the image tugged at something deep inside her. Ellie stared up at the woman, her head tilted. "Are you Dad's new boss?" HR nearly choked. The board representative's jaw tensed. Micah closed his eyes briefly. "Ellie." But Ellie, innocent, blunt, and unfiltered, kept going. "My dad always helps people. He helped a lady at the hospital, but he never told me her name." The hallway fell silent. Eleanor blinked, stunned by the simple truth spoken with so much faith. Her eyes softened not out of pity, but recognition. That same recognition she felt that night in the rain. That night, he stayed. She crouched slightly to meet Ellie at eye level. "Your dad helped someone very important," she said gently. Ellie's brow furrowed. "Is it you?" Micah felt his heart stutter. Eleanor didn't look away. "Yes," she whispered. "It was me." HR stepped forward sharply. "Ms. Hayes, we need to remain objective. This situation is—" Eleanor lifted a hand. Not harsh, not dramatic, just quiet authority. The kind that made the air itself fall still. Her gaze drifted from Ellie to Micah, then to the two administrators who had decided his worth based on boxes he could never check. "If this company," she said softly but firmly, "cannot recognize character when it stands right in front of us, then maybe we're measuring the wrong things." The hallway swallowed the words whole. The board representative stiffened. "With respect, Ms. Hayes, hiring out of personal sentiment—" "This isn't sentiment," Eleanor cut in. "It's clarity." Her voice steadied stronger now. "This man stayed with me for 4 hours when he didn't have to. He did it quietly without expectation. He has experience in emergency response. He has resilience. Most people here couldn't muster on their best day, and he's raising a child on his own, with more grace than half the board shows in a quarter." HR's cheeks flushed. The board representative's nostrils flared. Micah felt heat crawl up his neck, not shame this time, but something unfamiliar. Something like respect. Something he hadn't felt from another adult in a long time. Ellie squeezed his hand, whispering, "Daddy." "She's nice." Eleanor straightened. "I'm signing his employment approval today." "You can't," the board representative began. "I can," Eleanor replied, calm as stone. "And I will." Micah opened his mouth, unsure whether to thank her or warn her that tying herself to him in any capacity might have consequences neither of them saw yet. But Eleanor's expression told him she had already accepted whatever fallout would come. She turned to him with a softer gaze. "If you want this job, it's yours." Micah swallowed. He thought of Ellie, of bills, of long nights trying to stretch what little they had, then of the way Eleanor had looked that night, broken, terrified, yet fighting to hold on. He nodded. "I'll take it." A faint smile touched her lips, brief but real. HR forced a tight breath through her teeth. "We'll process the paperwork." The board rep glared at Eleanor before walking away, heels striking the tile in sharp protest. The hallway emptied until only the three of them remained. Ellie tugged the hem of Micah's shirt. "Daddy, are you really going to work here?" Micah smoothed her hair. "Looks like it bug." Eleanor watched them, something tender flickering beneath the practiced CEO mask. "She's adorable," she said softly. Ellie beamed. "Want to see my drawing?" Eleanor blinked. "I would love to." But as Ellie dug into her backpack, Micah noticed something on the wall behind Eleanor, the company logo. Hayes Innovations. The same name he'd heard whispered in a conversation days ago. Something about a clinic closure. A faint unease crept into him, but it passed as quickly as it came. For now, he had a job. For now, he had hope. Eleanor walked away to finalize the paperwork, unaware that the logo shining above her shoulder was tied to the deepest wound Micah carried, and that the truth was already moving toward them like a quiet fault line underfoot, waiting to crack. Micah's first week at Hayes Innovations unfolded with a quiet rhythm, steady, organized, almost mechanical. Every morning began with the soft beep of his ID badge scanning at the employee entrance, followed by the gentle hiss of the security doors opening. The building lived and breathed like something alive, printers, whirring vents, humming footsteps echoing across the marble lobby. He moved through it with practiced awareness, the way someone who'd once worked emergency scenes never stopped observing, listening for things others overlooked. The faint jitter in a flickering light, the uneven click in a door latch. The tone of a voice raised a fraction too high in a hallway dispute, but no one here knew that part of him. He kept it buried. To them, he was simply the new security hire. Still, routines, however new, brought a sense of grounding. And grounding mattered to him, especially for Ellie. On the third day, he picked her up from kindergarten and brought her into the building while he wrapped up his shift. Ellie, wide-eyed and endlessly curious, skipped down the corridor, her sneakers squeaking softly with each step. She paused in front of offices, peeking in as if expecting to find treasure. Employees glanced up surprised at first, then charmed despite themselves. Ellie had a gift for dissolving tension without trying. She greeted everyone the same way, with a bright hi and a tiny wave. One afternoon, she wandered into Eleanor's office. Eleanor looked up from her screen just as Ellie poked her head inside. "Hi, Miss Eleanor," the little girl chirped as if they'd been friends for years. Eleanor blinked, caught off guard, then something softened. "Hello, Ellie. You're visiting us again." Ellie nodded, climbing onto the visitor chair, legs too short to reach the floor. "Daddy's almost done. I wanted to show you my drawing." Micah hurried in behind her. "Ellie, give Miss Hayes some space, sweetheart." But Eleanor shook her head. "It's all right. I could use a break." Ellie handed her a paper filled with scribbles of a tall building, a small stick figure girl, and someone who looked vaguely like Micah. "That's Dad," Ellie announced proudly. "He's brave." Eleanor studied the drawing, her throat tightening. "He is," she said quietly. And she meant it. For a moment, Micah saw something human beneath the CEO armor, someone who laughed softly at children's drawings, who reached out with gentle fingers so the paper wouldn't tear. Someone who hadn't forgotten that night in the hospital, not for a second. But he didn't let himself read too much into it. She was his boss. He was a security guard trying to rebuild his life. That was the line. Over the next few weeks, small moments wove themselves into their daily interactions. Eleanor, passing Micah in the lobby, would offer a nod, not formal, but sincere. Micah, holding an elevator door for her, would exchange a quiet, unspoken acknowledgement. Ellie would run to show her every new drawing, each one punctuated by Eleanor's patient compliments. It wasn't closeness. Not yet. More like two people circling the edges of something neither dared name. But beneath the surface, old wounds simmered. Eleanor carried her own scar, shaped by a night from her childhood when her younger brother had struggled to breathe. Their mother rushed him to a local clinic only to be turned away because they didn't have insurance. Eleanor had been 11, old enough to understand the fear in her mother's eyes, but too young to fight the system. Her brother survived, but barely. The memory stayed with her, sharpening into the resolve that drove her all the way to the CEO position she now held. Still, that resolve had a cost. Micah didn't know any of this, and he didn't ask. Not yet. He sensed there was more to her than the poised executive in tailored suits, but he kept his distance. His past was still too raw to let anyone close, especially someone like her. But then, one evening as he patrolled the 6th floor, he heard two managers talking outside a conference room. Their tones were casual, but the words slipped through the air like tiny daggers. "Closing that community clinic saved us so much money. Yeah, the old CEO would have dragged the process out." Eleanor handled it fast. Micah slowed his steps. Community clinic, handled fast, money saved. A faint chill crawled up his spine. One manager continued shame about the people in that area, though. That clinic was all they had. But corporate's corporate. The conversation drifted away as they walked down the hall. Micah stood still. His breath tightened, chest rising and falling with a slow, heavy rhythm. The name of the clinic wasn't said, but something inside him twitched. The familiarity. the echo of a memory too painful to hold for long. He swallowed hard, forcing the lump in his throat down. Not every clinic is the same. Don't jump to conclusions. But as he continued his rounds, the building felt colder. Every beep of his badge felt louder. Every step felt heavier. At home that night, after Ellie fell asleep, curled against his side, Micah sat alone at the kitchen table. The hum of the refrigerator, the soft tick of the wall clock sounds that usually soothed him, suddenly felt sharp, intrusive. He opened his old emergency response files on his phone, typed in the clinic name he tried not to think about, the place that had shut down right before the night he lost his wife. The search bar blinked back at him. He didn't dare hit enter. Not yet. He closed his eyes. Don't go there. He needed his job, needed stability, needed peace. But deep down, something restless stirred. A sense that the past he'd tried to outrun was waiting for him inside those corporate walls. He inhaled slowly. Tomorrow, he promised himself he'd let it go. But tomorrow had other plans. The next day, while helping IT secure the executive floor, Micah noticed a presentation on the conference screen, Hayes Innovations Restructuring Plan. And there, it was a familiar clinic name glowing on screen. His heart dropped. The past wasn't drifting back after all. It was already here, waiting for him to look. The building was unusually still that night, quiet in a way that made every sound feel amplified. The soft whir of the HVAC system, the faint clicking of IT technicians updating software somewhere down the hall, the muffled hum of servers behind a locked glass door. Micah's shift had stretched longer than usual. ET needed the executive floor cleared while they upgraded the network, and he'd volunteered to stay. Over time, pay meant extra breathing room for Ellie's school supplies, maybe even a proper birthday gift this year. He walked the corridor with slow, measured steps, flashlight in hand, though he barely needed it. The ambient lights glowed softly along the floorboard's corporate twilight. Each echo of his boots felt strangely hollow. As he reached the large conference room, a screen flickered inside. Someone had left a presentation open a slide mid-transition colors muted title, Half-Visible Hayes Innovation System, Restructure. Phase 2. He felt a knot twist in his gut. He shouldn't look. He knew he shouldn't. But something tugged at him anyway, an instinct born from years of reading subtle details, piecing together scenes before others noticed the cracks. He stepped inside. The room smelled faintly of stale coffee and dry ink, the remnants of a long meeting earlier. Papers were scattered across the sleek table charts, reports, legal notes. Nothing unusual for a corporation this size. But then he saw it. A folder, half open a corner, hanging off the table. The name, printed on the cover, sent a shock through his chest hard enough to make him grip the back of a chair. Maple Ridge Community Clinic. Final Closure Report. The clinic. That clinic. He stood motionless, breath shaking softly in his throat. Memories slammed into him uninvited the night of the accident, the frantic drive to the emergency hospital, the agonizing words from the attending physician. If she'd reached medical care 10 minutes earlier, things might have been different. He reached out, fingers trembling, and opened the folder. Inside were pages of financial explanations, cost breakdowns, relocation strategies, cold words, calculations, rows of numbers that spoke about efficiency but said nothing about the people they had affected. He skimmed through until one particular page stopped him cold. Closure effective date. Just 3 weeks before the night he lost his wife. His breath hitched. He flipped another page, scanning the timeline. He pulled out his phone hand, shaking harder now, and opened the digital file of his wife's emergency report. The date glowed in the screen light. He aligned the two pieces of information. The timeline matched. Perfectly. The drive to the nearest open hospital had been nearly 12 minutes longer. 12 minutes. Micah's throat tightened painfully. The room felt smaller air, thinner, as if the walls were inching closer. He forced his eyes back to the report. Approved by Eleanor Hayes, Chief Executive Officer. Her signature sat at the bottom of the page, elegant, confident final, a pen stroke that had never known the consequences it carried. Micah's chest constricted with a violent ache he hadn't felt in years. Nights of guilt he had buried deep began to claw their way back up. He heard echoes of that night siren's wailing tires screeching the frantic call he made from inside the ambulance. He heard the ER doctor's words, the silence that followed, the sound of Ellie's tiny cries when he held her alone afterward. He closed his eyes, swallowing hard. The building around him hummed softly, coldly, indifferent. He remembered Eleanor's trembling voice on the night of the attack, the way he'd stayed beside her bed, the small, unspoken connection forming in the weeks since, the kindness she'd shown Ellie, and beneath all that warmth, this truth waited in the dark. She hadn't known. He believed that somewhere inside he knew, but the fact didn't stop the surge of betrayal sharp and sudden tearing through the fragile trust he'd started to build. His hands tightened around the report until the paper crinkled. A whisper broke loose from his throat, hoarse and low. She signed this. She signed away our chance. His voice trembled. He didn't shout. He didn't throw anything. He just stood there, an unmoving figure drowning quietly in the weight of a truth too heavy to bear. He inhaled shakily, trying to calm the storm rising inside him. His heart pounded louder than the distant clicks of IT keyboards. His breath echoed in his ears, uneven and ragged. He needed air. Micah forced himself to close the folder gently, almost reverently, as if it held the last pieces of a puzzle he wished he'd never solved. But he didn't put it away. No. He picked it up. He wasn't sure what he was going to do with it yet, but one thing was clear: he couldn't ignore it. Not now. Not knowing what he knew. He stepped out of the conference room folder still in his hand, the low hum of the building following him like a steady pulse, cold, detached, unfeeling. Unlike the firestorm roaring in his chest. Every footstep toward the elevator felt heavier, like gravity had doubled. He could hear the faint echo of Eleanor's laugh from earlier that day, soft and genuine, echoing in memory. Ellie's giggle when she showed her another drawing. All of it twisted painfully now, threaded with a truth neither of them had known. Micah pressed a hand against the cool elevator wall as the doors closed around him. His breath came in short, broken waves. He wasn't angry at her, not in the simplest sense. He was angry at fate, at timing, at a world that could be so cruel in the smallest margins. But, personal or not, her name was still on that signature line. And tomorrow, he would have to face her. The elevator descended slowly, the only sound the soft mechanical hum and his own heartbeat, heavy, uneven, echoing with dread. As Micah stepped out into the night air folder tucked under his arm, a single thought settled in his chest like a blade. She has no idea what she took from me. Morning came too quickly. Micah barely slept. Every time he drifted off, he heard sirens again. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her signature. And every time his heartbeat finally slowed, Ellie shifted beside him and whispered in her sleep, "Daddy, don't go." He sat on the edge of the bed long before dawn, elbows on his knees folder resting against his thigh like a weight he couldn't put down. The house was still only the quiet hum of the refrigerator, and the soft tick of the clock kept him anchored. "You have to tell her," his mind whispered. "You can't carry this alone." But another voice answered, tired, scared, bitter. What if she already knew? What if this whole thing is worse than you think? He didn't know which voice to believe. By the time he reached the Hayes Tower, the sun had barely risen. The lobby buzzed with its usual morning energy heels, clicking scanners, beeping elevators, sighing open and closed. But everything felt too bright, too sharp, as if the world had no idea a fracture line had just opened inside him. He clutched the folder tighter as he stepped into the private elevator to the executive floor. Each floor the elevator passed hummed with a soft, mechanical throb. Each hum pressed deeper into his nerves. When the doors slid open, he walked down the hallway toward Eleanor's office. His footsteps echoed louder than usual, heavy, deliberate, strained. His breath felt too loud in his chest. He knocked once. Her voice, calm as always, drifted from inside. "Come in." Micah stepped through the door. Eleanor sat behind her desk reviewing a stack of documents. She glanced up and her expression softened instantly when she recognized him. There was a small warmth in her voice, the kind she saved for only a few people. "Micah." "Good morning. Is everything all right?" He placed the folder on her desk. The soft thud of it landing cut her sentence in half. Eleanor blinked, her posture shifting subtly. "What?" Is this Micah swallowed voice tight? "A report left out last night. It needed the floor cleared." "I found this." Eleanor opened the folder, her eyes scanning the first page, then the second. By the third, the color drained from her face. She looked up. "Micah." "My wife," he said quietly, interrupting her, "the night she died. The paramedics said if we'd reached a closer clinic she might have lived." Eleanor's lips parted, breath trembling barely a fraction. Micah continued, voice raw. That closer clinic was Maple Ridge. He watched her eyes widen, not with guilt yet, but with dawning realization. Because she understood what he was saying before he even finished saying it. And that clinic, he whispered, was closed because of a restructuring decision. Eleanor's hand froze on the page that bore her signature. Micah didn't raise his voice. He didn't shake with rage, but the grief in him was sharp-honed by years of trying to dull it. "You didn't know," he said, half to her, half to himself. "I can see that. I can hear it in your breathing right now. You had no idea." Her voice cracked. "Micah." "I didn't. But it happened anyway." The room felt too small for both of them. The hum of the building outside grew distant, muffled under the weight of unspoken truth. Eleanor pushed the chair back, standing slowly as if her legs weren't steady. Her palms pressed against the desk. She looked at him with a devastation he hadn't expected. "I never saw the names," she whispered, voice breaking for the first time since he'd met her. "They were just numbers, files, metrics." Micah looked away. The pain in her voice didn't undo the pain inside him, but it complicated it, twisted it into something heavier, something neither of them knew how to name. He forced himself to meet her eyes again. "I saved your life," he said quietly. "And last night I found out you—" He paused, breath faltering. Had a hand in ending hers. Her breath hitched a soft, broken sound. She stepped around the desk slowly, as if approaching a fragile object. "Micah, if I had known, if someone had shown me this, told me. But they didn't," he said, voice low trembling. "Because the system you run doesn't see people until it's too late." Eleanor flinched as though the words struck physically. She sank into the nearest chair, burying her face briefly in her hands before lifting her head again. Tears shimmered along her lashes, not for herself, but for something she suddenly understood in a way only guilt could reveal. Micah spoke again, softer this time. "I'm not saying you're a monster. I'm saying you made a decision without understanding the cost. And I'm the one who's been counting that cost every day since." Silence filled the room. Not empty. Silence. Heavy. Silence. A silence made of broken things. Eleanor whispered, "I don't expect forgiveness." Micah shook his head. "I'm not offering it." She swallowed hard. "I would never have signed that file if I had known what it meant on the ground. I was trying to prove to the board that I could make hard calls, that I was strong enough." Micah's jaw tightened. "Strength isn't measured by how much you cut. You taught me that the night you broke down in that hallway." A tear rolled down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. He couldn't look at her because the guilt radiating off her wasn't performative. It was real, and that made everything harder. After a long moment, Micah stepped back. "I need some time," he said hoarsely. "I need space to think." Eleanor nodded, breath unsteady. "Take whatever you need." Micah turned and walked toward the door. His footsteps were slow, heavy, uneven, like each step pulled a thread loose inside him. When he opened the door, someone stood just outside. A board member. Someone who never missed anything. Their eyes flicked from Micah's face-strained Stormy to Eleanor's tear-streaked one behind the desk. The board member's expression tightened sharply, sensing scandal-leveraged danger. Micah stepped past him without a word. But as the door closed behind him, he knew the collision inside that office had rippled far beyond the two people who experienced it. Down the hallway, the board member pulled out his phone, already dialing, already plotting, while Eleanor sat motionless inside her office, staring at the folder that had just shattered everything she thought she understood about herself. For the next few days, Micah moved through the halls of Hayes Innovations like a shadow present, functional but distant in a way that even strangers could sense. The familiar sounds of the building, the soft ping of elevator doors, the quiet chatter of employees passing each other, the rhythmic tapping of keyboards felt oddly muted, as if the world had slipped slightly out of sync. He kept his head down. He kept to his roots. He kept every conversation short. And he kept away from Eleanor. It wasn't anger that built the space between them, it was something deeper, heavier. The ache of knowing the truth. The ache of wanting to deny it. The ache of realizing that nothing would ever be simple again. Even Ellie sensed the shift. One morning, as Micah packed her lunchbox, she tugged on his sleeve. "Daddy, did Miss Eleanor do something wrong?" Micah froze with the thermos still in his hand. He felt his heart clench in that tight, helpless way. Ellie had a way of seeing things he tried so hard to hide. He crouched to her level. "It's grown-up stuff, Bug. Not your fault. Not hers either. Dad just needs time." Ellie frowned, confused but accepting. "Are you still friends?" Micah's throat tightened. "I don't know yet," he murmured. At the office, Eleanor tried to focus on work, but she wasn't hiding nearly as well. Anyone who looked closely could see that something inside her had cracked. Her voice during meetings was still precise, still steady, but her eyes were different. Unrest flickered behind them like tiny sparks. She kept replaying the conversation with Micah in her mind. Every word he'd spoken felt etched on her skin. "You made a decision without understanding the cost." "I've been counting that cost every day since." She wanted to fix it. But how do you fix something you didn't know you broke? And worse, how do you face the one man who saw you at your most vulnerable and now sees you as the person tied, however unintentionally, to the worst night of his life? As if that wasn't enough, the board was circling. They requested a private meeting. Eleanor sat at the head of the long mahogany table listening to the rustle of legal documents, the tapping of expensive pens. The atmosphere was cold, corporate rehearsed. One board member cleared his throat. "Ms. Hayes, several concerns have been raised." Another chimed in. "There are whispers. Very concerning whispers that you've engaged in." "Personal entanglement with an employee." She stiffened. "There is no entanglement. That man was seen leaving your office visibly upset," the first member pressed. "And you were visibly distressed." "I'm allowed distress," she replied sharply. A woman at the far end folded her hands. "Is it true he obtained sensitive documents related to clinic closures?" "Those files were left unsecured," Eleanor said, "and he brought them to me immediately." A skeptical murmur. Still, perhaps it would be wise to let him go. Quietly. No need for complications. Eleanor's fingers curled under the table. Let him go. The man who saved her life. The man who held her hand for 4 hours through fear. The man whose wife was lost partly because of decisions she'd signed. "No," she said, voice calm but threaded with steel. "I won't fire him." The table stirred with disapproval. One man leaned forward. "This isn't personal, Ms. Hayes. It's about optics." She met his gaze, eyes steady. "It is personal to me. And it should be. If we remove every employee the moment they intersect with our past mistakes, we're not protecting the company, we're burying the truth." A murmur rippled across the room, half dislike, half unease. "We expect you to reconsider," another warned. "I won't," she replied. The meeting ended in tension so thick it clung to her skin as she walked out. Every click of her heels echoed louder than usual. Every breath felt heavier. But even the board's pressure didn't weigh on her as much as the silence between her and Micah. Downstairs, Micah was checking the east entrance when Ellie appeared with her babysitter waving at him excitedly. Daddy Micah smiled, tired but warm. "Hey, Bug." Ellie ran up to him and held up a drawing 3 stick figures holding hands under a bright, childish sun. "This is us," she said, pointing. "You, me, and Miss Eleanor." Micah's heart twisted. He wasn't sure if the ache came from longing or regret. Eleanor happened to walk through the lobby at that exact moment. She slowed when she saw them, Micah kneeling, Ellie glowing the drawing between them like a tiny bridge he wasn't ready to cross. Ellie turned and beamed. "Miss Eleanor, look." Eleanor's steps faltered. She approached, voice gentler than he'd ever heard it at work. "What do you have there, sweetheart?" Ellie thrust the drawing into her hands. "It's us, 'cause we're all friends." The words hit both adults like a quiet blow. Eleanor blinked, the softness in her eyes turning fragile. Micah looked away, breath tight because a part of him wished it were true, and another part still bled too deeply to step closer. Eleanor knelt beside Ellie. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "May I keep it?" Ellie nodded vigorously. "Yes." And for a moment, just a moment, Eleanor allowed herself to smile. But when she stood again and their eyes met, the air shifted. Raw, tender, broken. Neither moved toward the other. They were standing in the middle of a widening distance neither of them knew how to close. That night, after Ellie was asleep, Micah lay awake listening to the faint buzz of the streetlight outside his window. His mind was full of Eleanor's face, the board's likely reaction, the haunting pages in that folder, the memory of sirens from years ago. He wanted to stay angry. It was easier, cleaner. But when he pictured Eleanor collapsing in that rainy street, the way she whispered, "Please don't leave me," he felt the truth. She hadn't meant to hurt anyone, but she had. And now both of them were carrying a wound neither asked for. He rubbed his temples, frustration simmering. "I don't know how to do this," he whispered to the quiet room. The problem wasn't hatred. The problem was that he didn't hate her at all. He cared, and that made everything harder. Hours later, alone in her penthouse office, Eleanor dialed her private attorney a number she hadn't used in years. "If I wanted to initiate a voluntary review of all past clinic closures," she said quietly, "even if it risks my position, what would it take?" No answer came immediately. Just a long, heavy pause, and the sense that the ground was about to shift for both of them. The announcement came without warning. Mid-morning, the building speakers crackled softly, an unusual sound in a place where everything was engineered to run silently. Employees looked up from screens, meetings paused, mid-sentence elevator doors held half open as a calm female voice filled every corner of Hayes Innovations. "Attention, all staff. Please gather in the main atrium for a company-wide strategy update in 10 minutes. A strategy update, unexpected, unscheduled." Micah, standing near the lobby checkpoint, felt a faint unease rise in his chest. His instincts, always sharp, always scanning, picked up on something off in the tone. Not the words, but the undercurrent. Too steady, too controlled. The last time he heard a voice that, carefully neutral, had been on the radio the night of the accident, dispatchers masking crisis with calm. Employees began flooding past him, murmuring among themselves. He checked his watch, cleared the entrance, and followed the flow. Ellie, who was spending an hour in the building before being picked up by her neighbor, clung to his hand. "Daddy, what's happening?" "I don't know, Bug," he murmured. "Let's go see." The atrium, a vast glass-walled space with layered balconies, filled fast. The low hum of voices echoed upward. A few reporters were present too, holding notepads and cameras. That alone sent a ripple of tension through the employees. Reporters didn't just show up at Hayes Innovations. Micah scanned the crowd, his gaze landing on the front. Eleanor stood at the temporary podium, hands resting lightly on either side. Her suit was immaculate, but her posture carried a heaviness, a weight he hadn't seen before. She wasn't hiding behind the CEO mask today. She was stepping out from behind it. His chest tightened, though he wasn't sure why. The room gradually quieted. Eleanor lifted her eyes and began. "Thank you for coming on such short notice." Her voice, amplified through the speakers, held no tremor. Yet underneath the steadiness was something else, something raw, something fragile but unbroken. As many of you know, Hayes Innovations has spent the last several years restructuring our healthcare operations. We made decisions based on data projections and financial stability. A few board members shifted on the sidelines, visibly tense. Eleanor continued, but what we did not consider deeply enough were the lives behind those numbers. A hush fell. Every breath in the room seemed to pause. Micah's grip on Ellie's hand tightened. Eleanor exhaled slowly, grounding herself. "I want to tell you a story. Not a polished one. Not a scripted one. A story about a night years ago when I was 11 and my little brother couldn't breathe." The crowd straightened. The clinic near our home turned us away because we had no insurance. My mother had to drive across the city to find a hospital that would treat him. He survived barely, but I never forgot that night. Her voice grew softer. It became my compass. The reason I worked the hours I did. The reason I fought to climb into this position. I believed that if I had enough power, enough leverage, enough say, I could prevent families from being turned away ever again. The reporters leaned forward, typing. But somewhere along the way, she said, I lost sight of the human beings behind these decisions. I prioritized the survival of the company over the survival of the communities we were meant to serve. A stir rippled across the atrium. Then she said it. 2 years ago, Hayes Innovations closed several community clinics, including the Maple Ridge Clinic. Micah's lungs froze. Eleanor's gaze flicked toward the crowd, toward him, and then back again. Recently, I learned that a woman died after being forced to seek care farther away because Maple Ridge was closed. She left behind a husband and a little girl. A tremor broke in her voice. Just one. The room was silent. Her death was not in our reports, she continued. Not in our metrics. Not in our forecasts. But it should have been. I should have looked deeper. I should have asked harder questions. I should have been braver than I was. Her words dropped like stones in water, echoing outward, heavy and unforgiving. A board member muttered sharply, but Eleanor cut him off by raising a hand. I will not hide behind business language. I will not pretend this was unavoidable. Mistakes were made, and I am accountable. Micah felt his pulse in his throat. The guilt in her voice wasn't performative. It was real. It was bleeding through every layer of her carefully built armor. I am announcing today, Eleanor continued the formation of a new Hayes Community Health Fund, dedicated to reopening, restoring, or replacing every clinic we shut down. Gasps scattered through the room. The board stiffened visibly. This will not improve our profit margins, she said, but it will save lives, and that is worth more than profit. A journalist raised a hand. Ms. Hayes won't. This put your leadership at risk. Eleanor gave a small, tired smile. Perhaps, but if leadership means ignoring harm, then I should lose it. Micah felt his breath shake. He didn't know whether to be moved or terrified for her. At that moment, Ellie tugged free of his hand and walked straight through the crowd toward Eleanor. Micah reached out too late. The room parted around the little girl as if guided by instinct. She reached the podium and slipped her tiny hand into Eleanor's. Eleanor froze. Ellie looked up at her, voice small but clear through the microphone. My mom didn't get to the hospital in time, but maybe other moms can now. A gasp spread like wildfire. Eleanor's breath broke. Her hand trembled around Ellie's. And in that moment, the quiet distance between Micah and Eleanor snapped into something achingly human. Two lives bound by tragedy, guilt, and the smallest sliver of hope. The board exchanged panicked looks. One of them stepped forward, voice strained. Effective. Immediately the board will convene to reassess Ms. Hayes's capacity to lead. Whispers exploded across the atrium. Eleanor bowed her head, gently squeezing Ellie's hand before handing her back to Micah, who had finally reached them. Their eyes met not as CEO and employee, not as savior and survivor, but as two people standing on opposite ends of a truth neither could undo. Micah lifted Ellie, holding her close. She wrapped her arms around his neck. Around them the building buzzed with confusion, fear, admiration, anger. But for a moment, just a moment. All he heard was the soft tremble of Eleanor's breath as she stepped away from the podium. As the crowd dispersed and the board hurried upstairs to begin their closed-door strike, Eleanor stood alone in the emptying atrium, knowing full well she had just placed everything she'd built on the line, and not knowing whether Micah would walk toward her or away. The boardroom lights were too bright. They always were, designed to illuminate every flaw, every hesitation, every sign of weakness. Eleanor sat at the end of the long, polished table, hands folded posture straight, but her pulse thudded so loudly in her ears that it nearly drowned out the low rumble of arguments ricocheting across the room. Reckless, irresponsible. She blindsided us on camera. Investors are already calling. This could tank our second quarter projections. Voices layered over one another like a storm. Sharp, relentless, accusatory. Eleanor didn't defend herself, not because she couldn't, but because something had shifted deep inside her. The moment Ellie's small hand slipped into hers during the town hall, something old and frozen inside her had cracked open. The board's chairman tapped the table sharply. Enough. We know the issue. We need a decision. A woman on the board leaned forward. We can't remove her outright. The public reaction would be catastrophic. She told the truth. They admire that. Another scoffed. They admire honesty until the stock dips. The chairman exhaled slowly. We propose an oversight committee. Direct supervision over Ms. Hayes's decision-making until we re-establish stability. Eleanor nodded once. Calmly. I understand. The chairman blinked, startled. You agree, I do. Her voice carried no bitterness, no defiance, just clarity. I made a mistake. I'm willing to be held accountable. A strange silence followed. In a room built on power plays and political maneuvers, sincerity was disarming. But sincerity didn't erase consequences. By the time Eleanor stepped out of the boardroom, her body felt weightless, like she'd just walked away from something monumental and irreversible. The hallway outside buzzed softly with distant activity. Phones ringing, elevators opening, shoes pattering across tile. All she heard, though, was her own breathing, uneven, fragile. Micah was waiting near the security desk, unsure if she wanted to see him, unsure if he wanted to see her. When she emerged, he straightened instinctively. Their eyes met. It wasn't anger that passed between them. It wasn't forgiveness either. It was something raw, a shared understanding of two people standing at a painful crossroads. Are you all right? Micah asked, voice low. Eleanor gave a small, tired smile. That depends on your definition. He almost smiled back, but something in him wouldn't allow it yet. She hesitated, then spoke gently. I wasn't trying to expose your family's story. I didn't name names. I know, he murmured. A beat. Do you still want to work here? She asked. He let out a slow breath. I don't know. Their silence felt thick, dense with unspoken thoughts. She didn't push him. He didn't step closer. Two people bound by truth but separated by pain. The next afternoon, Eleanor called him into her office. No board members, no tension, just an earnestness he hadn't seen in a long time. She stood near the window city, sprawled behind her. The faint hum of downtown traffic seeped through the glass, steady, distant, almost comforting. I want to ask you something, she said quietly, and I want you to know you can say no. Micah waited. I'm building a task force." She continued to review the new community clinics. "To make sure nothing like Maple Ridge happens again, I need people who understand crisis, people who see what spreadsheets can't." Micah's hands tightened at his sides. "Why me? Because you've lived what most executives only theorize about." She swallowed hard. "And because I trust you." The weight of the words hit him unexpectedly. Trust. It had been a long time since he felt worthy of it. "I'm not who I used to be," he said quietly. "No," she said gently. "But maybe you're becoming someone better." He looked away, jaw tense. "I don't know if I'm ready." Eleanor didn't step closer, but her voice did. "Maybe you're more ready than you think." A soft knock on the door broke the moment. Ellie peeked inside, smiling shyly. Miss Eleanor lit up in a way Micah had never seen. "Hi, sweetheart." Ellie trotted in and held up a small paper airplane. "I made this for you." Eleanor knelt, accepting the crooked creation like it was priceless. "It's perfect." Micah watched them, something warm and painful stirring at the same time. Ellie had no idea how complicated things were. Children rarely did. They just loved without caution, without scars. Ellie looked at her dad. "Daddy." "Are we staying today?" Micah's throat tightened. "Yeah, Bug, we're staying." Eleanor's eyes flickered, but she didn't speak. Over the next week, Micah began working with the new community initiative. He taught first aid drills, reviewed emergency protocols, trained staff, the familiar sounds of medical equipment, the beep of scanners, the whoosh of oxygen lines no longer made him flinch. It wasn't easy. Sometimes the memories surged. Sometimes he had to pause, look away, breathe. But each time he felt himself falter, Ellie squeezed his hand. Each time doubt whispered in his ear, Eleanor's quiet, steady voice cut through. "You're helping people again. Not saving the world, just helping. One step forward instead of standing still." The edge of his grief began to soften, and Eleanor, while still under intense scrutiny, seemed lighter in moments when she joined the training sessions. She asked questions, listened, learned. She didn't try to erase the past. She tried to build something better around it. One evening, after a long training session, she and Micah stood on the rooftop terrace of the Hayes Tower. The city stretched out below them, a sprawl of lights and murmuring life. The wind was soft, the night quiet, the weight between them gentler. "I keep thinking about your wife," Eleanor said quietly, "about what she deserved, about what I didn't see." Micah exhaled slowly. "I know you didn't mean for any of it to happen. That doesn't make it hurt less." "No," he admitted, "it doesn't." Their silence wasn't hostile now. It was honest, fragile, human. He almost said something that hovered on the edge of vulnerable, something neither of them was ready to hear or deny. But he swallowed it back. This wasn't a fairy tale. Not yet. Still. For the first time since everything came crashing down, the air between them felt open, like a door quietly cracked waiting for a choice. As they stood together under the city's glow, preparing for the launch of the new community clinic, Micah drew a breath, ready to say what had been sitting on his tongue for weeks, when footsteps echoed behind them. A voice called out Ms. Hayes, "There's something you both need to see." The fragile peace trembled, and the night shifted again. Morning sunlight filtered through the tall windows of the new community health center, carrying with it a quiet warmth that wrapped the entire building like a soft blanket. The air inside hummed with gentle sounds, children laughing in the lobby, nurses calling names, the rolling wheels of a supply cart gliding along tile. It was the kind of soundscape that soothed rather than startled, the kind that belonged to a place meant for healing, not panic. For the first time in years, Micah felt steady. Not whole, not yet, but steady in a way he had forgotten was possible. He stood near a training table, guiding a small group of new staff through emergency response basics. The faint hiss of a practice oxygen valve, the soft, rhythmic beeps of a simulation monitor, the muted shuffle of latex gloves sliding over hands. Remember, Micah said, his tone calm, and even in any crisis your voice is your anchor. If your patient can hear you breathe steady, they'll breathe steady too. His words carried experience, painful hard-earned, but now transformed into something useful, something life-giving. One of the trainees raised a hand. How do you keep from freezing? When everything goes wrong. Micah inhaled slowly. The memory of a rainy night tugged at him, but this time the pain didn't swallow him whole. You don't avoid fear, he answered. You walk beside it, and you keep moving. A soft voice drifted from behind him, spoken like someone who lived it. Micah turned. Eleanor stood a few feet away wearing a simple blazer rather than her executive armor. Her expression was warm, almost shy, as if she wasn't sure where she fit in this new world she was helping build. But she was here, present, trying. It mattered. "Good morning," she said, stepping closer. Micah nodded. "Morning." He expected awkwardness, expected distance, but instead an ease settled between them, quiet, careful, real. The staff returned to their practice drills, giving the two of them a moment of unspoken privacy. Eleanor looked around the clinic, her gaze lingering on the smiling faces, the bustling rooms, the sense of life awakening in the space. "It's working," she whispered. "People are coming. Families who didn't have care before." Micah nodded, watching her as much as he watched the center. "You did this." Eleanor shook her head softly. "We did." The gentle exchange held something deeper, something no longer sharp with guilt or grief, but softened by growth. She exhaled slowly. "Tomorrow, a few reporters will be here. They want a story about the center. I told them the only one that matters is the people who walk through the doors." Micah smiled faintly. Good answer. Their eyes held for a beat too long, and then a small pair of feet pattered across the floor. Daddy, Miss Eleanor Ellie, came running in, clutching a piece of paper in both hands. "I finished it." Micah scooped her up with a practiced motion. "Show us, Bug." Ellie held out the drawing, colorful scribbles, wobbly shapes, but full of intention. 3 people stood in front of a building. 1 tall, 1 medium, 1 very small. Over their heads in uneven letters were 2 words, "Our Place." Eleanor's breath caught. Micah felt something warm bloom in his chest. Ellie grinned proudly. "It's the 3 of us and the clinic. 'Cause this is where people get better. And where we take care of each other, right?" Eleanor's eyes shimmered, not the sharp shine of guilt from weeks before, but something gentler, something that felt like hope rediscovered. She knelt beside Ellie. "Right," she whispered. "Exactly right." Later that afternoon, the 3 of them stepped outside for the ribbon-cutting ceremony. A small crowd gathered, community members, volunteers, staff. A sense of anticipation hung in the air. Photographers adjusted their cameras. Children tugged at their parents' hands. Micah looked at the modest sign above the entrance, Hayes Innovations, Community Health Center, but someone had added a smaller plaque underneath in partnership with the families we serve. Eleanor hadn't approved that addition. She hadn't needed to. Someone understood the spirit of the place, and her decision to allow it spoke volumes. A doctor handed her the ceremonial scissors. She hesitated, glancing briefly at Micah and Ellie as if reminding herself that this moment wasn't just symbolic for the community, it was symbolic for her too. "Would you both join me?" she asked softly. Micah blinked. "Are you sure?" Eleanor nodded. "This center exists because of all of us." Micah stepped forward, Ellie perched happily on his hip. Together, the 3 approached the ribbon. The crowd quieted. The wind carried the faint rustling of trees, the soft murmur of anticipation. Eleanor lifted the scissors. Her voice, steady and certain, carried across the crowd. "Here's to second chances, to responsibility, to doing better than yesterday." Micah swallowed a lump in his throat. Ellie leaned her head on his shoulder, whispering, "Daddy, this is important, right?" He pressed a kiss to her hair. Yeah, bug. It is. The scissors snipped through the ribbon, and applause erupted, warm, genuine cleansing. Eleanor closed her eyes briefly, letting the sound wash over her. For once, applause wasn't about power or presentation. It was about truth, accountability, healing, a future she wasn't afraid to face anymore. When she opened her eyes, Micah was watching her, not with accusation, not with distance, with something closer to acceptance, and the possibility of something more. Eleanor stepped closer. "Micah," she murmured, "I know things won't be simple. I know I can't ask for forgiveness on a convenient timeline, but I'd like to walk forward, with you, slowly, honestly, one step at a time." Micah nodded, emotion thick in his voice. "I can do one step at a time." Ellie tugged their hands together, giggling. "Come on, we have to go inside. We'll miss the cookies." Laughter rippled through the three of them, light, warm, unguarded. The kind of laughter that hinted at new beginnings rather than old wounds. They followed Ellie inside. The clinic door opened with a soft hiss, letting out the gentle sounds of life footsteps. Checked-in patients. Children chattering. The calm drone of healing in motion. Micah breathed it in deep and steady. This place had once been a symbol of loss. Now it was becoming a symbol of something new, something earned, something hopeful. As they stepped across the threshold together, Eleanor whispered almost to herself, "This feels like the start of something good." Micah answered quietly, "Yeah, it does." And as Ellie pulled them forward, smiling, laughing small fingers linking the two adults who had spent years drowning in separate grief, the world inside that clinic glowed with possibility. Not a fairy tale, but something better. A new beginning built on truth, responsibility, kindness, and the courage to try again. And that's where our story comes to a close today, in a place rebuilt not by perfection, but by courage, by honesty, and by the simple, stubborn belief that we can choose to be better than the pain that shaped us. If there's one message this story carries, it's this: our wounds don't have to be the end of us. Sometimes they become the very doorway to a new beginning. Kindness, accountability, and second chances, they still matter in this world. And when people choose to do the hard, human thing, lives change. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever witnessed a moment of unexpected kindness, or lived through something that reminded you what healing truly means? Share your story in the comments. Your words may be the hope someone else needs today. And while you're here, tell me, where are you watching from? I love seeing this little storytelling family grow across cities, states, and countries. If this story touched you in any way, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next chapter we create together. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for spending your time with this story. Your support means more than you know. Until next time, take care of yourself, take care of each other, and keep choosing kindness.